Hi, my name's Dan Snow. I am passionate about Napoleonic era naval history. And that's why one of my favourite movies in the world is Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, with Russell Crowe playing Captain Jack Aubrey. In this movie review, I'm going to be trying to sort out fact from fiction. This is History Hits Deep Dives.
You sure, Mr. Hollom?
Yes, sir.
Man of war?
I don't know, sir. It was only for a moment. I thought I saw a shape.
Did you see it, Mr. Calamy?
No, sir.
Seeing the enemy is obviously so important. There would have been lookouts high up in the mast, visibility at sea with its changing weather, its mist, its clouds. It was so sketchy. You have a huge advantage if you see the enemy before it sees you. Both from, and you'd have been scanning the horizon from the deck and aloft, i.e. up in the rigging, up in the masts. Just love the detail of that ship. Look at it, it's corrected every particular. They're lowering the ship's boats. They're towing some of the ship's boats behind. In fact, they would have put the officers' luggage in those boats so it wouldn't have been damaged in the event of a firefight.
Strike the bell!
Turn the hourglass upside down, so important. Everything on board ship had to run like clockwork, and you had a system of watches, they were called, like shifts, people coming up from below, people going back down, eating and resting below decks. And everything, time was kept with these hourglasses. And time, obviously, vital for navigation as well. You had to know how far you'd travelled. And there you go.
Down! All hands down!
An astonishing portrayal of a broadside. That's basically an enemy ship firing its cannons at you. And just as you see here, you'd have seen the flashes of any guns well before the cannonballs hit the ship. They're travelling much slower, obviously, than the speed of light. Everything's made out of wood and rope. It gets smashed to splinters when iron cannonballs crash into it, and you get that brilliant impression there.
You're gonna have to get closer to poke his eye. Run out the starboard battery.
Aye, sir.
Mr. Allen, come up on the wind.
On the wind, sir.
Lay me alongside at pistol shot.
There you go, they're running out the guns now. So on board you've got blue-coated sailors and you've got red-coated Royal Marines. They're like soldiers of the sea. They're armed with muskets. They might perhaps fight at closer quarters as well as keeping the officers safe from mutiny.
Take your section into the main top.
Stand tall on the quarterdeck, son, all of us.
I love how he drags the midshipman up. He's a boy. The midship, they took boys as young as 9, 10, 11 years old to sea, and eventually they could become midshipmen, which is the lowest rank of officer. He says, get up.
Mr. Boyle, run up the colours.
Aye, sir.
They get the naval jargon so right in this movie. It's one of the great lines. Mr. Boyle, run up the colours, which means break out the flag, the ensign, show that this ship is a British ship. You wouldn't have your national flag flying the whole time. It would get very threadbare, but you, in battle, you run up the colours, show people who you are. The job of a Georgian naval officer was to display conspicuous leadership. You had your uniform, you had your epaulets, you had your badges of rank, and you would have been very conspicuous to the enemy. It's very dangerous to be a captain. You're standing on the quarterdeck just as Russell Crowe is here, as Jack Aubrey is here. At the Battle of Trafalgar, for example, British captains suffered terrible casualties because they were so exposed.
Midship's in, sir!
Hold your position!
Look at the effects of those broadsides smashing through those wooden walls. Splinters were one of the great dangers. It wasn't just the cannonball itself, it was these splinters that you can see here. Supersonic shards of razor-sharp wood spiralling through the air.
On the uproar! Fire!
You see, I love that. You see the great big ropes there holding back the cannon. The cannon, when they recoil, if you just let them go, they would smash right across the decks. They have to be restrained by these huge ropes. Look at the complexity of that rigging. There's miles of rope rigging on board, and spars huge bits of wood held aloft by all this rope. And with enemy shot, they'd sometimes use different kind of shot. They'd use bar shots, so great long bars of iron, swinging through the air that would then scythe down masts, rigging, sails, causing complete chaos on the deck of a ship, as it's causing on HMS Surprise now. Brilliant depiction here of the surgeon. It's covered in blood, sleeves rolled up, people waiting to be seen. The surgeon would have been right down in the bowels of the ship, right below the waterline, very, very dark. You can see there would have been holes below the waterline where cannonballs smashed through the hull of the ship, and the carpenter and the carpenter's mates were on standby in actions like this. They'd have been running around with wooden planks, just banging them into holes. You can see the ship's listing now, it's taken in water. Look at that, that's amazing, isn't it? The effect of those cannonballs punching through those canvas sails. The French ship's using its so-called bow chasers, so cannons mounted in the bows to try and get HMS Surprise before it disappears into the cloud bank. You can see the water levels rising. Here you can see the pumps, all man-powered of course, and human beings just pumping away the counts of ships, pumps running 24, 48 hours to try and stop the rise of the water in the ship's bilges. And when there was no wind, this was quite common. When there was no wind, you would you'd put the ship's boats out, you'd tie great hawsers to the bows of the ship, and you'd try and tow it away. And that's what they're doing here. They're hauling the ship.
Pipe down! Silence on deck!
That is the most accurate depiction in the history of cinema of a Napoleonic era naval engagement. It is staggering. The special effects, the language used, the impact of cannonballs on a wooden ship. It is brutally realistic. Captain Aubrey Russell Crowe shouts at his men to try and reduce the range, so reduce the distance between the two ships. Now this is both what you do when you're facing a bigger ship, because they've got bigger cannon that can fire further. So if you've got smaller cannon, you need to get closer, try and get up in their face, get up in their grill, and bring your weapons to bear. It's a brave move to do that, take on a bigger vessel. The other thing is that was also a British tactic, because the British believed that the best way to win a battle at sea was to close with the enemy and pound them with superior gunnery. The British tended to have better guns, technically. Their crews were better drilled, better trained. So get in close, punch them really, really hard until they give up the fight. The French typically want to stand off a little bit further, use their weapons to try and inflict damage on the enemy ship, blow away their rudder, blow away their mast, their rigging, their sails, and then slowly kind of move in once they were badly wounded. And that's actually what you see in this engagement. That's why it's quite clever. This is the French fighting as they actually would want to fight. You stand off a bit further, you use your long guns, your heavier guns, to knock down spars, sails, to cause chaos in the enemy's ship, and if you can, to take out its rudder so the ship can't steer. And at that point, the enemy is prey. There's nothing they can do about it. You can close, you decide the timing, the range, and the intensity of battle. These ships are all powered by the wind. So obviously the wind is so important. The direction of the wind, the strength of the wind, how it's interacting with the tide and the current. Vitally important in these battles is to be upwind. It's a bit complicated, this bit, but these ships were very bad at sailing into the wind. You can basically if the wind's coming this way, you can zigzag like this. So if you're upwind, you can come down on the enemy at a time and a speed of your choosing, and you've got far more ability to steer and maneuver than the enemy that's desperately trying to sail upwind. So they call it having the weather gauge, and an enemy with the weather gauge was a very dangerous enemy.
You may have had the weather gauge, but we had the weather gods.
I have no idea precisely what it is you're talking about, but he did seem to come off rather well.
7 weeks sailing, and he happens in darkness on our exact position.
Well, then perhaps he was looking for us.
This is so brutal, so realistic. And there would have been such a contrast, the noise and the chaos of battle and sailing and rowing the ship on deck. And then right down the bowels of the ship, entombed way down in the ship. And that's where these operations took place. And you see the doctor, the surgeon, applying a tourniquet. You see him having to bite down on that. No anaesthetic. And good surgeons could get an arm off in a matter of seconds. And that could be the difference between saving a life. They would use a razor to cut the flesh, they would fold back the skin, and then they use a saw, a bone saw. This is difficult to watch. And, you know, he's a kid. Midshipman's a kid. Nelson went to sea when he was only just 12. It was very normal for young boys to be at sea in this period. In this case, being operated on without an anaesthetic. So amputating limbs was a very, very common procedure in Nelson's Navy. Nelson himself had his right arm amputated. What happens if you sustain damage that can't be repaired? You know, the bone was shattered, he's had splinters in his arm, he sustained damage to blood vessels. You can't repair that in this period of human history. So the only option is to take it off, because if you leave that terribly wounded arm, it will get infected, you will get blood poisoning, and it will travel up your arm and it will kill you. And so the toughest medicine here is removing the arm quickly, applying the tourniquet, sewing it up.
I've never seen a braver patient.
There were no qualifications necessary for a ship surgeon. You just found someone who set themselves up as a surgeon. They came with their bag of tools, and that was them. In this movie, they set Dr. Acheron up as someone who's a bit more elevated. He's actually a physician. He's had a medical practice on land as well, and everyone's very proud of the fact they've got a really good doctor on board. But a lot of ships would have had doctors that were little better than butchers. Really, they were just good at chopping flesh. And they would have had to work in very, very dark, confined, stinking quarters, right down in the depths of the ship, flickering lamps and candles. There would have been all around them the moans of wounded men. They would have had a very short staff to try and nurse these men. So they're being kept in horrific conditions. They're having to wait to see the doctor. Nelson was carried down HMS Victory when he was mortally wounded at the Battle of Trafalgar. He was carried down. And he said to the surgeon, no, don't look at me. My spine's shot through. You look after these other men first. So we get the sense that there was a long line of men waiting to be seen.
Mr. Hollom! Help young Wally into Mr. Gallant!
How many more men?
This is just a terrifying depiction of a storm at sea. It's one of the hardest things to film and make look realistic, because you can't really film in a giant storm at sea in a ship like this. So the effects are spectacular. They lose rigging, which is very, very normal. You know, after months at sea, wood rots, the ropes loosen. You know, it's very, very normal for pieces of the ship to break off. And often, as rigging did come off the ship, there might be men aloft at the time, men in the rigging, and here they lose a man overboard. Now, Russell Crowe, the captain, has to make a split-second decision here, and this was very normal. This was something that happened quite a lot. This is why captains have the power of life and death, literally, because the rigging is acting like a giant anchor. It's restricting the ability of the ship to move, to meet the waves, to take the ocean. And that means the ship is in danger of foundering, getting swamped itself. And so Russell Crowe has to make the split-second decision. Do you try and hack away the fallen rigging, but therefore definitely condemn that man to death? Or do you try and keep the rigging attached to the ship and hope that you can somehow crawl back on? And they make the decision here to cut the rigging away, which is the right decision because it saves the ship, it saves the men, but it means that one of your beloved crewmen, one of your comrades, is committed to the ocean, condemned to a certain icy death. And the way they would cut away the rigging is exactly like this. There were so many different ropes holding those broken bits of mast and spars. You had to cut through all of it. You used axes And these axes were readily available on the ship. They were used for cutting away rigging, but they would also be used for hand-to-hand fighting when the enemy were boarding your ship. So they're very versatile tools. Tragic, utterly tragic moment. I've read an account of a ship around this time commanded by Thomas Cochrane, same sort of thing happening. He had to make a split-second decision about whether to try and save the man that was overboard or let him perish to save the ship. And as you can see, the ship was almost foundering there. It was being dragged down. It was like having a huge sea anchor, waves crashing over the top through basically windows. And then by getting rid of that huge big drag, the ship rights itself and then can sail on. But the man is left in the Southern Ocean. He can only expect to live for a few minutes in those conditions. Fighting a storm was as complicated and took as much skill as fighting the enemy. And the crew would have had all sorts of techniques they would have employed to try and save the ship in a storm like that. First of all, you actually take a lot of the masts down. The masts, like a Lego ship, you can almost take them down, you stow them below, and so you just have the stubs of the masts up. You have little scraps of sail. You put up not very much sail, so just enough to allow you to steer the ship, but not too much that the wind catches you and kind of pushes you over or makes you go too fast down the waves. So there are all sorts of things. One thing they would do is you would run chains out, like anchor chain, behind the ship to try and slow you down if that's what you need to do, so you weren't surfing down these enormous waves. So there's all sorts of techniques that they would employ. They had to be as expert in fighting the weather as they had to be expert in fighting the enemy.
To you Spanish ladies, farewell and adieu. To ladies of Spain.
Music and song were really important on Royal Navy ships. It was the only way of entertainment they had, none of our modern devices. So singing would have reminded them of home, would have reminded them of loved ones. It's fun, you can do it together. They would have sung to doing heavy work as a working song as well. So music, fiddles, fifes, drums, very, very important on Royal Navy ships. And I love this scene because you get a sense of life at sea. You're not just seeing the fighting, you're not seeing the storms, the drama, you're getting the moments of domesticity that would have been the reality for men for long, long periods of time away from their homes.
Sail for Odin land. We hope in a short time to see you again.
What a wonderfully true voice Mr. Hollom possesses.
Indeed.
And then you get a nasty turn here because the midshipman joins in and the crew are obviously taken against him. I think like when any group of human beings get together, there's going to be outliers, there's going to be politics, and this poor midshipman has just got himself in a very weird position of just being rejected by the rest of the crew, and that must have been awful because there's nowhere to go. Keeping the crew happy is one of the most important jobs of the captain, and a lot of that is food, water, and alcohol. You've got to sustain them physically. The alcohol ration was incredibly important. When they ran out of booze, that was a terminal event on a Royal Navy ship. But you've also got to encourage them to enjoy their work, to sing, to have comradeship, and a lot of that comes through good leadership, showing the men that you are worthy of their trust, you're worthy of their obedience, and you're going to get the job done. You're going to get them home safe.
It's like Killick says. Morning of the battle, he doesn't have the guts to beat to quarters. Then his entire gun crew's killed, except for him.
As soon as he went up the mizzen, Will falls.
And whose watch was it when we lost our wind?
So every morning the ship would wholly stone the deck. That's what you see here. They clean the deck, they're rubbing off the grime of the day and washing it down. It was a key part of the daily routine. And they've taken against this midshipman. He's got a problem establishing his authority. And this must have been very normal. You're a young man, you're inexperienced, and you've got people on your watch. You've got people who are much older than you, much more experienced than you.
You there! Stand fast! Master at arms, take that man below and clap him in irons.
Aye, sir.
Mr. Pullings, defaulters at 8 bells.
Aye, sir.
Captain Aubrey's obviously got a zero tolerance policy on these occasions. And he says, You know, he says we're going to discipline at 8 bells, which is a time of day when 8 bells were rung.
He was deliberately insubordinate.
I'll set that to right, sir. I'll be much tougher on them from now on.
You don't make friends with the foremost Jack's lad. They'll despise you in the end, think you weak. Nor do you need to be a tyrant.
No, sir.
The problem with mutinies is they probably start with small things. It's like a slow burn. And that's why captains would be right on it, looking for any sign of mutiny or malcontent. There's one very famous mutiny during the French Wars, which is famous because it's so unusual, and it was in 1797 in the Caribbean, when a particularly tyrannical captain was killed and his ship taken over by his crew. It was on HMS Hermione. There was the famous mutiny on the Bounty, where Captain Bligh was put in a small boat. There were big naval mutinies in anchorages, in ports in England at the end of the 1790s, but those were to do with poor pay. The rate of inflation had gone up. It's a cost of living crisis. So there were some mutinies, and they were often focused on ships with particularly tyrannical captains. But the vast majority of Royal Navy ships went about their business without significant disciplinary issues.
You failed to pass for lieutenant twice. I know your habits. You're not a bad sailor. You have the knowledge. You can't spend the rest of your life a midshipman.
It's talking here about becoming a lieutenant. Basically, there was an exam, although in the Navy a lot did depend on patronage and having wealthy, important political connections. The Navy did value seamanship, and you couldn't fake that. And they did make you sit an exam to become a lieutenant. And Russell Crowe is asking this midshipman why he's failed the exam, and how he can't spend the rest of his life being a midshipman.
Look, Hollom, it's leadership they want. Strength. Now you find that within yourself, and you will earn their respect. Without respect, true discipline goes by the board. Yes, sir.
It's difficult to watch this bit. You see the man tied to the grating. Now, flogging, depending on the ship, was either very common or very unusual in the Navy this period. Some captains refused to flog. Most captains used flogging as a last resort. Some captains flogged a lot. The boatswain would have a kind of ball of rope that he would go around just whacking people occasionally if he felt like it. That was a low-level punishment. And then flogging was a more formal proceeding. The ship's company gathered, officers wore their finest uniforms, and a man would be strapped to the grating, and then he'd be flogged by the boatswain or the boatswain's mate with a cat and nine tails, like a whip with 9 sort of tentacles on it with knots on them, and it would cause terrible damage to a man's back. And many sailors of the period would have had scarred backs from flogging. And it was seen in this period as essential to maintain the discipline of the ship. If the discipline broke down, the thinking went, the ship would just be a rabble of men. They wouldn't be capable of working together. They would not be capable of getting home safely or carrying out their mission. The hierarchy had to be respected, and so Russell Crowe very reluctantly, I think, agrees to the flogging of this man. This scene is so powerful. They're all tugging their forelock. It's a gesture of respect to an officer, but of course they're doing it ironically, aren't they? And he had to make his way through the crowded deck. It would have been absolutely packed with people. Incredibly intimidating scene. These are the people he had to live alongside, serve alongside for years on end. He's lost their respect, and respect is a very, very hard thing to earn, to rebuild. And you get a sense of how small that community was, how intense those experiences were.
Mr. Hollom, you gave me such a start. You feeling better now?
Yes. Much better, thank you.
This is such a sad subplot in this movie, the story of midshipman Hollom, who's convinced himself that he's the source of all the bad luck the ship's experiencing. I think they would have been very, very superstitious. Sailors in this period were famously superstitious. And he'd come to see himself as a so-called Jonah. He'd come to see himself as someone who's responsible for all the bad things happening on the ship. He's not happy. The crew don't like him. He's caused people to be flogged. He's getting no respect. There's a nice detail here. He picks up a cannonball before jumping overboard because he knows that will suck him down to his death very, very quickly. There's a common practice at this time, burial at sea, where you would tie someone in some canvas, you'd put cannonballs in with them to suck them down to the depths, trying to avoid sharks eating their corpses.
Goodbye, Blakeney.
You see him disappearing down like that, and that is the end of Midshipman Hollom. You don't read about too many suicides like this. They do crop up from time to time, and I think if somebody obviously experiencing kind of a mental health breakdown as a result of the trauma they've been through, the extraordinary scenes of battle, the illness, the hardships they experienced at sea, it wouldn't be that uncommon for someone to want to end it all. Particularly in this case, he'd been rejected by his community. He felt like a failure. He felt like he wouldn't be able to win his place back within the hearts of the men. It's a very, very sad subplot.
It's a rare phasmid, sir.
A phasmid?
It's an insect that disguises itself as a stick in order to confuse its predators.
Hurry up or they'll see you. I can't leave that, that's fine. Just come up here quick and get some whaler slops.
Right, lads. Now, I know there's not a faint heart among you. And I know you're as anxious as I am to get into close action. But we must bring him right up beside us before we spring this trap. That will test our nerve. And discipline will count just as much as courage. Topman, your handling of the sheets to be lubberly and un-Navy-like. Until the signal...
He tells the top men, i.e. the men up in the mast, the top of the mast, who are going to be manning the sails, he tells them what he wants them doing. So they're going to keep the ship sailing. He tells the guys manning the guns exactly what he wants them doing. So they're going to inflict maximum damage on the enemy vessel as it comes alongside. He tells the Marines that he wants them shooting their muskets, sweeping the enemy deck clear, trying to shoot the enemy captain, enemy lieutenants.
They mean to take us as a prize. And we are worth more to them undamaged. Their greed will be their downfall.
Well, this is a stunning display of leadership, and this is the thing about being a captain in the Navy this period. You had to be a charismatic leader, you had to give your men morale-boosting speeches, you also had to be an expert navigator, you had to be an artisan, you had to know how the ship worked, how you could repair it, you had to be a meteorologist, you had to be a warrior, you have to do everything. And Captain Aubrey embodies that. He gives a great speech here. He's doing two things. He's trying to encourage his men, give them courage, get them ready for the fight, psych them up, give them a team talk, but he's also giving them a very, very clear description of what they need to do in the battle to be victorious. So there's two very important roles.
England is under threat of invasion. And though we be on the far side of the world, this ship is our home. This ship is England.
And what he's saying is even though we're on a little ship on the other side of the planet, floating about, this is still Britain. And in Britain, we do things properly. We uphold the tradition of the Royal Navy. We fight as loyal subjects of His Britannic Majesty, King George III. So he's telling them how they're going to win the battle, but he's also telling them to do their duty as Brits.
So it's every hand to his rope or gun, quicks the word and sharps the action. After all, surprise is on our side.
He's got a great line. After all, surprise is on our side. Because they're on HMS Surprise, they've got the great ship that they know and trust. That ship's on their side, and also surprise on their side because they're going to surprise the enemy. All was fair in love and war, and there are examples in this period of the Royal Navy flying the flag of different countries, neutral countries, Denmark, America, things like that, in order to lure the enemy close to them. If you're going to take on an enemy ship that is bigger, has more powerful cannon than you, need to work out a way of trying to get up close to them, and so that you can use other tactics in order to defeat them, like boarding them, like sending your crew aboard that ship to just capture it with cold steel. And so it's not uncommon in this period. You do get accounts of ships being disguised as other kinds of ships, as merchant vessels, pretending that they're bait, or pretending that they're a rich whaler or merchant vessel with a hold full of valuable trade goods, and that will lure the enemy in. It will act as bait. They're not going to want to blast you with their cannon because they don't want to lose the value of what you've got in your ship's hold. And so they'll come alongside and they'll try and capture you. But if at that point you reveal yourself as a warship, well, then you have a great advantage because you're ready to fight. You can get that vital first broadside in, try and do damage, and then follow that up with boarding them. You do see captains like the famous Sir Thomas Cochrane, who we're pretty sure this character is based on in the film, Captain Aubrey. He does things like that. He gets in very close using deceit, and then he launches surprise attacks. Just as you've got your enemy where you want them, you break out, you raise your colours, your flag. You say, actually, we're a naval vessel. And that's where the expression to show your true colours comes from. You've got the cramped gun deck on the frigate. It's really not high enough for a tall person to be able to stand up straight. They're all doubled over, waiting for the French ship to close in.
Steady now, lads. Keep calm.
English whaler sirene. This is Acheron.
Barrett. Sir.
You have no possibility, no chance, but you have had warning. Stop now, or we will destroy your ship. English whaler, this is your last warning. Stop now, or we will destroy you.
Let's fly! Let's fly!
But there we go. As soon as they're close up, bang! Up goes the ensign. The guns are run out. Up go the gun ports, and they fire a massive broadside at very, very close range, all trying to hit the mainmast there, bring the mainmast down of the French ship. And you've got the Marines there. They're firing their muskets. They're trying to shoot Frenchmen on the deck. And the lieutenant is going along the line of guns, which he would have done. He's making sure each of the gun is aimed properly, it's sighted correctly, and then he pulls that string, which is connected to a flintlock mechanism. Bang! A spark goes down, ignites the powder charge, and the ball is blasted up the barrel of the gun. There goes the mainmast over the side of the ship. If you lose your mainmast, you are in big, big trouble. In this period, it means your ship is you're going to be unable to steer your ship, unable to maneuver it, and now the plans work. They've disabled the French ship. They are going to steer around, bring their other broadside to bear. So they've got two sets of cannon. They've got a set of cannon on either side of the ships. They bring their other broadside to bear, and they rake the enemy ship. This is the worst thing you can possibly happen to your ship, is for it to get raked. That means an enemy broadside is firing along the length of your ship.
Take a party and cross the wreckage as best you can. I'll draw their fire forward.
My divisions to join Mr. Pulley! Three-web captain! Three-web reserve for Lucky Jack!
So here he goes. They're now going to board the ship. If you've got a smaller ship with less powerful artillery on board, you want to bring the action to a finish as soon as you can. The way to that is to board the ship. Take them by surprise. Use your aggression. Destroy their will to fight. And there goes Captain Aubrey straight onto the enemy deck, leading his men, as the captains would have done in those encounters. Men coming over on spars, bits of wreckage, using it as bridges. I'm not sure how realistic this bit is yet when you let the entire British crew on board the ship. But they see the wreckage, the destruction of their broadsides.
Looks like the job is done, sir.
And there we go. The French are fighting back. You can see the muskets with bayonets on the end, so when you've shot a round, you've then got that razor-sharp piece of steel on the end, like a knife, a dagger on the end of your musket. You can use it as a spear. The officers would have carried pistols, Marines firing volleys, fighting more like soldiers in a land battle. And then it's hand-to-hand, a savage, savage battle on a very confined spaces, using axes, using pistols, bayonets, marlin spikes, things that come to hand, piece of equipment that you'd use to sail the ship. And then this is a terrible example of artillery at very close range. You'd use grape shot. So you'd pack the cannon not with a cannonball, but with basically a soft packet of musket balls, turning it into a giant shotgun, which would cause terrible, terrible death and destruction on the enemy crew. There's examples of the Battle of Trafalgar, dozens of men being cut down, one cannon discharge. It's a savage, toe-to-toe battle. Captain Aubrey calling for grenades, a small metal sphere packed with gunpowder with a little fuse in the top that would have caused terrible damage in confined spaces. When the ships are side by side like this, there are occasions where we know that the cannon couldn't be depressed far enough to shoot down into the ship below. So you've got a very odd situation where the cannon batteries can't actually engage the enemy. Captain Aubrey leading his way below decks, cutting a swathe through the enemy ship. Interesting, you wouldn't have had time to reload the pistols as you were fighting, because they each took probably, well, about 30 seconds at least. So you'd have had strings of loaded pistols around your neck ready for use.
Delta guns ready!
There would have been gun smoke, it would have been very difficult to see, it would have been very, very crowded, it would have been stinking, there would have been the screams of the wounded. It would have been a chaos of battle. Sense of the exhaustion there, Acheron and Aubrey just sweating, exhausted, after 3 or 4 minutes of ferocious action.
Now, sir, have they struck their colours?
I believe so, sir.
Is the captain inside?
Not yet, sir.
Carry on.
The battle comes to an end, as most sea battles in this period did come to an end, with one side striking their colours, and that means taking down their flag. Even in the mess and the din and the smoke of battle, you would often be able to spot, if you were on deck, the flagstaff at the stern. And if the flag was coming down, if it was brought down, that usually meant it's over. You'd put down your weapons. The ship had been surrendered.
Docteur?
Oui. Docteur Deligny, monsieur. I did what I could for him. Before the captain died, he said I was to give you this.
And this is where the director, the script writer, having a bit of fun, because I don't think there's much basis in the historical record for this. But they capture the ship, they capture the crew, but they don't know where the captain is.
So many wounded. Only that poor unfortunate Higgins to tend to them. Still, he's better than no doctor at all.
I met that doctor. I spoke to him.
No, he died of fever months ago.
Divini.
Ah.
Their doctor gave me this sword. Sir, Mr. Maud, change of course. Southeast by east. We'll intercept the Acheron and we'll escort them into Valparaiso.
And that sets the whole sequel up, which sadly never happened. I hope you've enjoyed this movie review of Master and Commander. If you want to see any more of our deep dives, you just have to click on any of these videos around me on the screen now.